Good evening, Boneheads, and welcome to Rollin' Bones with Ryan Howard, your RPG treasure trove. I'm your host and king of the Boneheads, Ryan Howard, and welcome to Valor Studios. We are a TTRPG content creation community who love sharing our stories with the world. As I said, this is Rollin' Bones. For anyone who's joining us for the first time, this is a tabletop role-playing talk show where I like to bring on guests from all over the tabletop sphere just to talk about their gaming experiences and hear a little bit about how they're making this RPG world a little bit more awesome. If you guys like what you see tonight, please subscribe by joining us here on Twitch. Click the subscribe button below, especially if you are an Amazon Prime subscriber. You get a free sub, and we would love it if you would use it on us. You can also find out more information about us and what we have coming up at valorstudios.com. And if you really want to talk with other people about Valor Studios stuff, you want to interact with those of us who are part of Valor Studios, you can do so on our Discord, which you'll see a link for over here in chat. And if you are joining us from YouTube, first of all, thank you so much for supporting us in that way. We love our YouTube family. And if you would like to share this video with anyone who was not able to join us live this evening, definitely do so at the Valor Studios YouTube channel. Definitely give us a subscribe there as well. And you'll find a link for that over in the chat too. And last thing I want to say to the YouTube audience is if you want to join us here live, it's every Monday night at 8 p.m. Central over at twitch.tv/Valor Studios. That's where you can join in the conversation. If at any point during the night anyone has any questions for myself or the guest, and you want to just shout that out, definitely put it in chat, and James, the producer here, will send it over to us. So without further ado, let's get on to tonight's guest. I hope everyone out in the Bonehead universe loves this game, Dungeon Crawl Classics, because we're talking about it again tonight, ladies and gentlemen. And we've got one of the luminaries of DCC here with us. He's written several adventures for them, including the Kickstarter smash that is up right now, DCC 100, Music of the Spears is Chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome to Rollin' Bones, Harley Stroh. Harley, welcome to Rollin' Bones.
Thank you, Ryan. That's a real treat. Thank you guys so much for having me on tonight.
Oh, no problem at all. It is always great to talk about some funky dice and some DCC, so I'm glad that we could do it with one of the greats.
Well, you're very generous, but thank you guys for all the support Rolling Bones gives to DCC. We really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem at all. So whenever someone comes on the show for the first time, we've got these questions that we like to ask just everyone so we can, find out where you're really coming from here as far as gaming goes. So let's begin at the beginning. Harley, how did you get into RPGs?
I was about 8 years old, and my little brother and I, we had a babysitter. He brought the Mincer Basic set over to our house to babysit for us. And I died. If you go into the Caves of Chaos, you go north through the Kobold Hall. You take a right, and you immediately drop down a pit. There's not poisonous. There's rats at the bottom that have disease. My character died after 5 minutes of play, and I was immediately hooked. And the next week, his family found out that Dungeons and Dragons was satanic, so they made him get rid of all his gaming books. And he met me in an abandoned lot behind his house, where we had all the dirt bike jumps, and he passed off what to like 8-year-old Harley was like this holy tome of just like Dungeons and Dragons stuff. And I took it home. I knew it was evil, right? Because his family forced him to get rid of it, so I hid it underneath my bed, and I've been playing Dungeons or Dragons or some iteration of role-playing games ever since.
Here, this is witchcraft. You can handle it, 8-year-old.
I was in love. Like, I was scared to tell my parents. And it was like, but this is so good. So yeah, my parents made me run. I ran my father, my mother, and my little brother through Caves of Chaos, and I've been hooked ever since.
Mm-hmm. When they realized that they didn't have any desire to run off into the steam pipes and go in search of Tom Hanks, they decided it was okay.
Yeah, there was definitely a period in high school where I wasn't doing so well at school, and I didn't get grounded. They took away my Dungeon Master's Guide. That was the real punishment.
Joke's on you, Mom. I have it memorized.
Yeah.
So, of all the games that you've played in your time, and you can say the obvious if you want to, but what would you say is your favorite RPG system of all time that you've played?
I appreciate the grace of the question. So when I was when I jumped in with Goodman Games under 3.5, right? So a few editions of D&D before. So we used to publish Adventures for Dungeons and Dragons as a third party publisher, and I was constantly writing adventures for Joseph Goodman that didn't quite fit into the rules. There was stuff that I wanted to have in the game. You'd have to like really shoehorn in the concept or a magic item or a spell or a foe or something. And so it legitimately, not just because I'm not just because I write for them now, but DCC was the first system that I could write for, and not have to but essentially break the rules to make something for my imagination to fit into whatever we wanted to have happen at the table. If there was a close second, it would be the original iteration of Cyberpunk, the 2013 box set. It's up there on the stacks behind me, but right now my heart and my love is with DCC, and it's a huge privilege to get to write for something that just comes naturally. Like Joseph, Doug Kovacs, and I, we were there at the start of Dungeon Crawl Classics, the role playing game, and so it's really been a privilege. It's really easy, Let's say, you roll out of bed, you imagine something, and it's like, oh well, this is the game system designed for the way I think of things, and I couldn't be happier. It's writing for it's a real joy. I'm not having to force any of my ideas around, which is a real gift.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Well, just for folks that are, they derive their gaming imagination from kind of the pulp, the Lankmar stuff. You were showing us the box set earlier, the Lankmar stuff, maybe the Purple Planet, the swords and planet stuff. Just for a more pulp-oriented, appendix N derived version of a role-playing game, DCC fits really well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now, those of us who play this game for long periods of time, we start to develop our own styles when it comes to how we like to play and how we like to run our games. So if you had to describe your play style as both a player and then as like a game master, how would you describe that, Harley?
Ryan, you're amazing. Can I just say, it's not because we're on right now, but it's so nice to actually have an interview with somebody that plays the game and has an awareness of how those play styles evolve. I haven't played DCC in years. I run it all the time. I run it constantly, but I can answer the way I judge is DCC has a reputation for being gonzo. My games are the inverse of that. I really appreciate, a lot of times I'll cut out halflings, I'll cut out dwarves and elves, and literally just run with the human classes. I have a pretty bare bones, simple, grungy Lankmar sort of game is where my heart really lies. And so when Magic does enter into the game, it's a big deal, and it's significant, right? And so so that's where my sensibilities lie, and obviously that that runs counter to where a lot of people, and I love all the folks that are running an insane gonzo DCC game or MCC game, and I love to see that passion and enthusiasm. But when I go home at the end of the night, it's upstairs beside my bed right now. I'm going through all the old Robert E. Howard stories.
Oh,
and so
yes.
It's kind of the Cole, the Conan. That's where the core of what I want to bring to the table resides. If you talk to Doug Kovacs at a show or something, he'll comment that it's just our games are oftentimes a lot less gonzo than folks imagine DCC to be, which doesn't make it wrong or right. That's the great thing about the chassis, is that you can bolt onto it whatever you want, and you can strip things from it, and the game still is just as solid as when you started.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I spent 3 hours with Luau Lu and Bill Barsh and Edwin. I can't remember Edwin's last name. Edwin Nagy, talking about using DCC to run Dark Sun. So
yes, right? It's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm right now. Well, not right now, but I have a deadline, March 1st. I'm gonna miss it, but I'm writing they folks go back in time on the Purple Planet, and they take place in the God King has died, and they're holding, and he's still atop his throne, atop the ziggurat, right? Like overseeing these gladiatorial games to choose the next God King of the Purple Planet. And the PCs are one set of gladiators in this pool of 8 that are competing, vying against one another, to win the throne of God King of the Purple Planet. But yes, I mean, it's totally Dark Sun derived. Like the Dark Sun stuff is just beautiful. Like you look at all that old. I mean, Brahm gets a lot of love for the color art, but you look at that black and white art that he did. It's just like, oh yeah, it's just so clean, so evocative. Yeah. I admire that you guys are playing that, Dark Sun. That's really cool.
And then you mentioned Robert E. Howard, so everyone at home, go ahead, update your Rollin' Bones bingo cards. I get to reveal to another guest, the Howard in my name is not coincidental.
No, come on.
I'm a distant relative of Robert E. Howard.
Wait, well, that's amazing. Yeah. I need to be a closer viewer. That's incredible. And so have you traveled back to the museum?
I have wanted to make a pilgrimage to Cross Plains several times. I just haven't been able to make it work.
Oh, that's so cool. I mean, that needs to be like a show all of its own, right? Like you guys could be like recording in the car as you drive there. Do you have the poem Samaria handy? I don't know if you could pull it off a shelf right now.
My book is downstairs. So.
Okay, yeah. I won't ask you to read, but it's so beautiful, and it's talking about there's the rain coming down, and he's looking out over hill, and they're growing more and more gray, and he thinks back to himself, Robert E. Howard, 100 iterations of himself, before, and thinking back to when he was a Samaritan. I just get goosebumps even thinking about it. It's so well done. It's so well done. That's really cool.
Oh yeah.
That's really awesome.
It's one of my favorite useless random facts about myself.
That's clout. That'll get you a beer at North Texas right away.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's great on this show because I talk to people who are almost everyone who comes on the show is a Robert E. Howard fan, and so I just I get to drop that on them, and everyone here thinks it's cool, but you take that into the business world, and I'm you guys ever heard of Conan the Barbarian? The Schwarzenegger movie? Cool. Yeah.
Oh, dude. Man. All right. So, and maybe it's off topic, and maybe you haven't announced it yet, but when you write your own stuff, are you gonna draw upon that well at all? I mean, because you're looking at the same horizons, the same sunsets, and the same dust in your mouth as Robert E. Howard had when he was writing those stories. Like when you think of creating material for role-playing games, does that influence at all, or are you looking towards to go other places?
I'm noticing in the stuff that I'm writing right now, there's a lot of Howard, but there's also a lot of Fritz Lieber in it as well. So
that's awesome.
It's a lot of the same kind of circle that I'm drawing from, but I definitely do take a lot of inspiration from what my ancestor brought upon the world. That's definitely something that I draw a lot of inspiration from.
So cool. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, get some photos from Cross Plains. I mean, that's a real treat.
Absolutely. Now, another thing that we all develop as we play this game for long periods of time are fond memories, especially those of us who then decide to dedicate a good amount of time to creating RPG content. So if you had to pick a fondest RPG memory, what would that be?
Oh, right. That's a hard question. I should have studied up better. Um, I think it's it's so corny. So you have to forgive me. If your viewers come away with anything today, they'll learn that I'm earnest and heartfelt and also pretty shallow. Um, it's the friends I got along the way. Having the opportunity to write for Goodman Games and to pair myself with Doug Kovacs and Joseph Goodman and Jen Brinkman and just the whole crew of solid people. That's the thing that I appreciate most of. That's what RPGs have given back to me. So it's not the time we rolled a 20 and we beat the dragon on initiative, and my little brother was able to hold up the ring of wishes and wish everybody back 5 minutes in time so that we didn't have to fight with that dragon. But it really is the connection that RPGs allow us with the people we play games with is really true and special, and it's easy to dismiss it, like you're just playing elf games or what have you, but there's a real connection there, and those friendships are significant, even oftentimes, and I'm sure you know this already, or you'll find it out. It's often fleeting. Like, these people will be in our lives for just maybe it's just for 4 hours, maybe it's just for a couple of years, and then they'll go on to something else. But it's the people that I've gotten to create these worlds of imagination with, that I've had the privilege of doing that with, are so precious to me, and it's almost corny to say it out loud, but even now, and thank you guys for letting me ramble, but when the world's a complete mess, we have a plague, shit's going down in Ukraine, like, even now it's like RPGs have value not because they allow for an escape, but because playing a game, like, authentic joy is real and is valuable, and to be able to deliver authentic joy to 8 other people in the world is not a trivial thing.
Right.
And so for those of us that get to publish these games, that we hit whatever, there's 5,000, 10,000, however many copies there are out in the world, if that delivers a little bit of joy to our players, that's significant.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned the people that you only have that relationship with for 4 hours at a time. There's a bond that immediately forms when you roll dice with someone, even like in a convention environment where you're just at the table for a very short time. The people that I run games for, I have very vivid memories of who those people are. A lot of times I remember their names, even if I just ran a game for them once. But yeah, there really is just something kind of magical about, we're gonna sit down, and for the next couple hours, we're gonna do this thing together. We're gonna play this game together, and if all goes as planned, we're gonna have fun together.
Yeah. And I don't claim to have any special insight into it, but there's something incredibly vulnerable around sitting around a table and playing Let's Pretend, essentially with dice. And I think you're right. It allows those friendships, those bonds to it's a hot house for those relationships, and they'll be following us for the rest of our lives. And I hope that who knows how long people are playing Dungeon Crawl Classics, but if at some point in time, Ryan, at some point in time, somebody can hand DCC with this evil, like Doug Kovacs, like your rule book, right?
Yep.
Off to a little 8-year-old and say, hide this beneath your bed, it's satanic. At that point, like, we'll have won. Like, we win the world, and take sailors, try to decipher, whatever is going on in Sailors in the Starless Sea. Hand this off. I mean, that was part of what made, because we had Goodman Games had 10, 12 solid years as a successful business publishing adventures for Dungeons and Dragons. And it wasn't until the advent of 4E that Joseph, he every summer he would go hang out with his cousins and his cousins' children, and he was struggling to teach them the rules. And and so that's what prompted him to come up with Dungeon Crawl Classics, was something that he could take on vacation, hand off to his his 8, 9, 12-year-old nephew, and they could be rolling dice in half an hour. And so those were the origins of the seeds, if you will, of what came to become Dungeon Crawl Classics.
Absolutely. and we're going to return to that very topic here in just a second because um, I've had some revelations around that particular side of things as well. But we have one more introductory question, one that's very important here on Rollin' Bones, because it really cuts into the heart of every guest that comes in. And I'll tell you, the answer to this question can be as philosophical or sophomoric as you want it to be. Harley, if you could put anything on a t-shirt, what would it be?
Oh, I'm not wearing it tonight. It's already on it. Like all my black T-shirts are Doug Kovacs art. I could it's awesome. At one point in time, I don't know. Doug was asking if I needed anything. I'm like, dude, half my wardrobe has your art on it, and that's the takeaway too, right? Like we know the people that create the stuff for us, and we create the stuff for us, and so to have it's what it is. If I had another thing on a T-shirt, Doug. So okay, a quick story. Gen Con, every at the Embassy Suites, every night after Gen Con shuts down, Doug and his motley crew of like the sweetest, kindest, most tattooed, scary dudes you've ever met. They go back to the Embassy Suites and they run pickup games. Doug Con. Mm-hmm. For every Doug Con, they make a T-shirt, and I've worn all of them into the ground. And my favorite is there's one that was for Punjar 50K. Punjar is like before we had the Lankmar license. That's where I set all my urban adventures for Dungeon Crawl Classics. Anyways, if I could put one thing on the T-shirt, it'd be to have Doug Con again, so I could buy another 20 of those T-shirts because there's only they were available 1 year, for 2 weeks, and I'm gonna wear that thing into the ground, and I'll miss it when it's gone. It'll never be there again.
Mm-hmm. I just have to ask for my own benefit. Where does one get a Doug Kovacs art T-shirt?
Well, you go to straight up. You just go get yourself to DougCon, or get somebody who is. So like literally at Gen Con in the evenings, Embassy Suites, they'll be running games and they'll have 40 odd T-shirts that they've printed up, in a variety of sizes. Send some, if you're not going to be at Gary or at Gen Con, send somebody over and be like, yeah, I'm here for Rollin' Bones. I'm here to like buy my 2 T-shirts, and then they'll get sucked into a game, and before you know it, in 20 minutes that person will be like running one of the tables. So it's really cool. What Doug does is we commandeer this entire like moratorium space. It's not intentional. Like it's like a food court when we're not there, but at night it's just a bunch of tables, and so usually at each table it'll be one section of a world. And so, at one point in time, like it was different factions. And so for Punjar 50K, like one table, like, all right, you guys are all the cops, and you guys are all the punks, and you guys are all this, and you guys are all that. And so they were all the different tables were fighting against one another. And so there was like 8 judges, like working with Doug to like, to run this cohesive, game of 50 people at once. So it's awesome, and it evolves every year, and it's different every year, and it's just DougCon. You just show up, you have dice, you have a pencil, and an open mind, and the games are just amazing. So yeah, get the also a lie. If you go to goblinminimart.com, I think that might be where Wayne Snyder sells what they have left over. I'll look it up in our show tonight and see if I can't post it.
Gotcha. You might have just turned me around on Gen Con, because I've thought for years that I wanted to go. Excuse me, sorry. And then I've heard all the stories about it's just like wall-to-wall people, and I'm like, maybe I don't want to go anymore. But I think you might have turned me around on Gen Con now.
It's definitely it's daunting. For a bunch of, well, I can't speak to you, but I'm an introvert. I hate people. I'm happiest. I'm a dungeon master, right? I'm happiest when I'm making up worlds alone, and occasionally sharing them. And Gen Con is daunting, but there's something really, I don't know, just once in your life, because like I don't know, remember when you're much older than or younger than myself, but the backs of like the Menser books and whatnot, you'd flip it over to the back, and there'd be like the black and white ad for Gen Con. It would have that, that weird symbol, like the compass sign. And I remember like just being a kid, and I was like, all right, when I get my driver's license, me and my 5 best friends, we're gonna drive to Wisconsin, and or drive to Milwaukee, and we're gonna go to Gen Con. And it never happened, and it never happened, and it never happened. And it wasn't until Goodman Games came along, and I was able to sell them an adventure. I went to Gen Con. I was like, holy smokes, here's 75,000. That's the experience. Like 75,000 people. They're all strangers, but every single one of them. You inherently have that experience, and it gave me a lot of empathy towards sporting events, honestly, because my 2 children are, for whatever reason, they take after their mother, and they're very talented at sports. And like, if you drag me to a game, I'd just blow my brains out. But like, all right, so what's the lure of football? What's the lure of soccer? What are the lure of these? It's like to be in a stadium surrounded by 50,000 people. It's like, oh, all of a sudden this makes sense. We're having this shared, to be surrounded by 50,000, 75,000 people that are all in love with the same thing that you're in love with, all in their own way. Like that guy loves Savage Worlds, and that's super sweet. And this guy's painting miniatures, and and she's bringing, like, when Evie brings Barbie Crawl Classics to the game, it's amazing.
Nice.
And she has like these amazing Barbie dolls, and like the mansion, that she uses as a judge's screen. And it's like, everyone has that same passion for gaming that we can really relate to. Mm-hmm. And to be with that many people with that same passion is a profound experience. Like, you don't need to do it twice, but to do it once, it's definitely worth it.
Absolutely. Now, we had mentioned this a little bit, and you mentioned that this is kind of where Joseph Goodman came up with the idea of, Dungeon Crawl Classics was being able to roll dice in 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. I recently kind of stumbled upon that myself in my own experience, because my primary utility for this game now is whenever someone finds out what I do and that I love doing this so much, and they say, hey, I've always wanted to try D&D. It's inevitably they say D&D. I've always wanted to try D&D. Can you show me how? I'm like, 1 second. Let me grab this hefty tome here and show you what role-playing games are all about. And I always, I couch it as, yeah, we're going to play D&D. We're playing Dungeon Crawl Classics, right, but we're going to play D&D. And I found one of the big problems for all the good parts of D&D and 5e in particular, the biggest problem when it comes to bringing new people to the table is someone's going to sit down and say, I want to play a wizard. And in 5e, the next question is, what kind of wizard? Right, and they have no idea because they don't know.
How can they? How should they?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas in Dungeon Crawl Classics, I want to play a wizard. Cool. Here's your wizard.
Yep. Roll 3d6 6 times. Pick the highest one. Make that your intelligence, and you're good to go. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you're absolutely. And I think there's a lot of value in DCC and some of the other old school games that come with that flavor, where when your character death, we're allowed to make death a real potential at the table, because it's not going to take us out for 5 hours or for 2 hours or however long it's going to take for you to generate that next character. And that's a real calculus that has to go on. Like, if it's going to, if you're running a game for me and all right, well, Harley's terrible at math, it's going to take him literally 45 minutes to roll up that 3rd level fighter. We're not going to kill him and stop the game for that long. Like, but if it's I could time you. We should do that at some point. Like, all right, Ryan, you have 45 seconds. Mark said go, and you're like, boom. All right, 1d4 for hit points. Here's 3d6 down the line. Here's 1d100 on the table for my background, and you're done.
Yep.
And you've created a DCC character. And you're ready to go. And I run games. At least like pre-pandemic, I would run games for kids at the library, and some of my players were begging for not begging, but death wasn't so much of an obstacle because they just love rolling up new characters. And these are kids, right? Like they're
Yep.
they're not what you would think of as the target audience for the OSR or old school games. Like they're 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, and they're just like stoked. They're like they want to know what they're they want to get that elven falconer, because he has the falcon on his head. Like, what do I got to roll in the background to get that? I think that's the like what you're saying is the real gift of DCC is that we're we're permitted to make it lethal because it's really easy to come up with a new character. And so you can you the other interesting thing though is, and I'm sure you've experienced this, I'd love to hear you speak about it. You start with your 4 zeros, right?
Mhm.
And the one you like gets picked off inevitably first. It doesn't matter where you put him in the marching
Yeah.
order. Like one guy with like a 15 strength, boom, he's out. And then but by the time you're down to one or two characters, and they're the ones you hated, and you're like, oh, I will never play this horrible character. You develop a lot of affection for them all of a sudden, and by the end, like no man, that 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 halfling, seamstress, she's gonna make it out of this thing, and she's gonna like stitch you a new asshole, and like all of a sudden you are in love with these characters that 4 hours ago, you despise. You're like, oh, why did I roll a 52 on that background table?
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks that talk about like emergent role playing elements, and that's one of the cool things. I don't know that we ever thought about it in an intellectual way when Joseph was writing DCC, but it's a really cool factor that you're given this tableau of potentials, and slowly they get winnowed down, and regardless, you're always in love with that last character, even though you didn't spend a week crafting them in between games. You didn't pick out their background. You didn't their family tree. You love them nonetheless. You don't love them any less for just having randomly generated that character.
Right. Absolutely. And the love comes from the going through the proverbial ringer with that character, and the fact that they come out on the other side of it. I like the fact that DCC basically gives you that opportunity to fall in love with your character that way, rather than uh, again, not to sound dismissive or anything, but rather than create your favorite superhero and
Mm.
keep them alive as long as possible. It's
Mm.
here's your farmer, or here's your seamstress, or here's your scribe. Um, Somehow, against all odds, they're gonna come out on the other side of this, and the adventure that turns them into what they eventually become. That's the process of you falling in love with this character.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's 100 different ways to make a character, and and 5e does it some ways. And you know the way that DCC does it isn't necessarily the right way or the one true way, but it definitely is a robust way for getting at the table quickly, gaming quickly, covering quickly when the character dies, because character death is a real thing.
Mhm.
And I don't think our passion for these characters suffers at all.
Right.
If anything, we love them because they're quirky and idiosyncratic, and you have make it up to a 5th level with a fighter or warrior, with a 7 strength. You're like, oh my god, I love this guy because I persevered. Like when I was a kid, of course, every fighter had an 1800 strength because that was just cool and that was rad.
Mhm.
But how much more infinitely radder is it to have a warrior that survived despite all these challenges?
Yeah.
I'm not cool because I have a high stat. I'm cool because I've survived despite my shitty stats. It's a I really enjoy it, and I mean, we've had. I'm not proud of. You're never proud to see players cry, but I've been at conventions running, and people get so attached to these things, and when something goes south, um, it's real, and it's heart wrenching, and yeah. We had one of my original playtesters. She was running a priestess, a cleric, and at one point, her character had died. The rest of the party was venturing into the mythic underworld in an attempt to steal her soul back from death. And it all came down to we the game had finished. and they were kicking us out of the convention, and she and the thief, like they grabbed me on the way out. They're like, no, we have to finish this. And it's all right, okay, so we find a random table and we do the thing. And Doug Keister, yeah, maybe this is what you're after. Yeah, favorite moments. But it's he beat death at this game of cards, stole the Ray's cleric back, and she was sobbing at the end. Her cleric had survived, and this was somebody with horrible stats that he was maybe 4th level at the time. It was, I don't know, things are real, and the emotional significance is real. It's a real privilege that we get to contribute to putting that out in the world.
Absolutely. Now, there's a name that we've been mentioning a couple times here on the show, and we talked about him a little bit before we came on, but we do need to mention the incomparable Doug Kovacs.
Okay.
I've held up this book several times tonight already. I'm going to do it one more time, because that right there, the inside front cover of DCC, that's my background on my computer.
Oh, nice.
And Doug's art is so evocative of just the whole ethos, the whole environment of Dungeon Crawl Classics. He's like your Errol Otis, which is funny because you guys also have Errol Otis, but Doug is really the one who I feel like sets the tone for DCC. So, like, what's been kind of your experience working with him? What's it like to work with him? What are some of your favorite things that he's done?
Oh, that's awesome. So, my very first adventure I wrote for Goodman Games in 2004, I mailed it to Joseph Goodman, like, physically, like, sent off an adventure plus maps and whatnot. That was Legacy of the Savage Kings. That very first adventure, he had at that very same time he was reading that, he had discovered that this artist that was kind of submitting stuff to him lived only a few blocks away in Chicago, and that was Doug Kovacs. So just by fate, Doug's first illustrations were with the first thing. His first illustrations for Goodman Games were also the same my first adventure for Goodman Games. And so to see to that experience of when you see your words come to life and come alive in a way that you had never imagined before is transformative. Like you had opened to the inset pages for the Goodman for the rule book. Give me 5,000 words and I couldn't write you anything as evocative as what Doug presents in 2 facing color pages. Like, maybe I could describe the worm, that's devouring, the torchbearer, or maybe I could, maybe paint a picture of the portal, that they're coming through. A good artist, can deliver all that information in just moments, right? And you apprehend it, and so when I think of the trinity that is like role-playing games, like you need writing, you need a judge or a dungeon master that's going to fall in love with the concept of this and deliver it to their players. But then it's really art that informs all of that. When I think back to the games I started with, it was the art that I fell in love with first, and when I think to the games I get to write now, it's the art that I fall in love with now, and the art just delivers that information with so much more immediacy and punch. You don't have to spend time deciphering it. You see it, it's right there, it's in your face. And you could flip through the DCC core book and find a new piece of art every time you open the book. Like I do this to this day. I reference the thing all the time, and I'll still find new artwork that I've never seen before. And it's really cool to be working with folks that value art that much. Okay, all right, I'll stop rambling. But you'd said, what is it like to work with Doug Kovacs? It's awesome, because you'll come up with an idea, you'll write it. Doug, in his brilliance, and I don't say that lightly, he sees something and he's like, well, this isn't cool enough. This completely happened with sailors. Originally I had written the big bad guy, for Sailors on the Starless Sea, definitely to be more like a Warhammer, black clad, glossy armor thing. Doug sends back the cover artwork, and it's yellow, and it's red, and it's blue, and sure, there's a chaos sign on there, but it's like it's vibrant, and and eye stalks, and just stuff punching out of this chaos paint storm or ink storm. Then all of a sudden, I need to take the manuscript back, and I need to rewrite it to try to match, what Doug's, created. So often, my work is, I'll do an idea, I'll turn in the manuscript, the deadline comes and goes. I've submitted my 15,000 words or whatever, and then the cover art comes back. It's like, no, guys, you have to kick that back to me. I have to make something that will never match what these artists have created, but at least I need to try to strive to get a little bit closer to it. We are so privileged to have all the artists. Like you open Sailors, so I fell in love with DCC back when we used to do blue lined maps. I think Keep on the Borderlands, right? Caves of Chaos, like blue, printer ink. I'm not sure, what the technical term for is, but it's clear. You can apprehend it in a moment. And then I remember the first time that Doug showed me apps for Sailors, I was like, Doug, this is trash. We can't use this. You can't understand a single thing about it. Like, where's the entrance? Where's the exit? What is this? Is all nonsense. This is meaningless. I can say that because it took me about 8 months to realize the error of my ways. Just how I say this with all honesty, I wasn't apprehending what maps could be. I knew what I wanted them to be, but that was down here. And then all right, well, let's deliver, the next thing up is, all right, well, let's put monsters on it and make it a really cool, evocative map. Well, let's deliver something, emotional attached to that map. And then all of a sudden, you end up with something like Music of the Spheres is chaos. It's like Doug has come into his full fruition, and it's something you have to study and lean into, and every time you look at it, you'll come away with a new detail you've never appreciated before. And I'm not ashamed to say that I was on the wrong side of that divide originally, only because I've learned to appreciate just how wrong I was. And, nowadays, I'll in the next few days, I'll be turning in this Purple Planet adventure, and I'm just praying that Doug will be the guy that gets to illustrate the cartography, because it's just so good. It's just so good, and it delivers so much more than just what a map is. So Absolutely. Yeah, that's working with Doug. I'm a huge fan.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's great how some of us get to work with artists who are able to really kind of bring about that extra sense of imagination. Because, and I talked about this a little bit with Ed Bickford when he was on the show, but sometimes it just takes one image to really make the imagination go in several different directions, but it just ties back to this one single block image that you saw that just had something in it that started a fire in your brain.
So when you say that, can you think of something that captures that for you?
As far as something that captures that for me, and this is kind of a silly example,
sure,
but I remember being 9 years old and going on IGN when Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb was going to come out on PS2 and Xbox and all that.
Yeah.
And I saw the image of Indy standing in the spirit world with the dragon just up above, off in the distance, this giant dragon off in the distance. And looking at it now, having seen all the graphical advancements that we have, I'm just like, why was I ever terrified by that? But when I was 9 years old, that was the most intimidating, scary thing ever. This giant dragon, and where does that dragon come from? And why, why does this hook me? What is it about this? And so That's kind of the best example to me of a piece of art, just a single still image, kind of really setting the tone for a lot of things that I put in my games now. So whenever people play in games that I run, when you notice that there's a lot of giant things off in the distance,
That's awesome.
that's where that comes from.
That's calling back. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I think you and I create adventures a lot the same way. And it's our brains are all storytellers, right? And so your 9-year-old brain was coming up with the backstory for what is Indy up to? What is this dragon? Every slight little detail. It's trying to connect dots or expand this web, this matrices of a story of this reality hinge to the single still illustration. um yeah, that's the and some of my favorite RPG art is art that an artist loves enough to lean into to provide the details that can really provide like a story or a clout behind it. You think of an easy one, like you think of like the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, right? And you know Sutherland, I love Sutherland. He's not for everyone, but there's this fairly static, a freak standing there, and he's holding on to this lady, and there's a fighter below him, and he's waving his sword, and the wizard's to the one side. Be done with it there. But then you look at it, and it's like, wait, the fighter has some heraldry on his shield. All of a sudden, you're going back to the Greyhawk folio, trying to see if you can place the heraldry on that fighter, because so maybe he was from these knights are here, and then and on the back side of this cover is the city of brass floating in the air, and there's this boat here with a tail that waves on it and creates its own wind, all from a simple illustration. We as dungeon masters, as storytellers, we infer this whole world, or at least the potential of worlds. And I don't know what it's like for you, and I'd love to hear it, but oftentimes I'm running games because these are the games I would love to play in, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
this is nobody else I know can deliver this, so damn it, I'm going to deliver it to you guys, and I want you guys to enjoy this as much as I'm loving it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah. I can't tell you how many games I've run just because I want to. I wish someone would try to run this game for me.
Right.
And I'm like, no one's gonna do it. Okay, fine. I'll run it for someone, and maybe they'll have the experience that I want to
have. or I think as dungeon masters, as judges, we have such a clear vision oftentimes of the world we want to play in, the world we want to deliver. That's what then permits us to deliver a game in Punjar or Lankmar or or what have you. Like, it's like we're in love with it, and so we want to pass that on to the players, and that's a real joy.
Mm-hmm. And just a hint for all my players out there, the NPCs that you guys run into who seem kind of cool but don't do a whole lot, that's who I wanted to play in this game. And they're not doing a whole lot because I don't want I want you guys to do what they should in theory be doing. So
well, that's boy, talk about like learned mannerisms as judges, like knowing that the players and the PCs always have to be stage center. That really it can't be Elminster appearing out of nowhere to pull them out of the whatever trouble they got themselves into.
Yep.
Like that's a real skill to learn or a lesson to learn probably as a judge or as a DM. Yeah, the adventure always has to sit around the PCs no matter what.
Yeah, and that's the thing with like anyone who's a big Salvatore fan, if they want to encounter like Wolfgar and Dritz and Caddy Bree in their games, you have to think like, do you actually want that? Because either they're gonna upstage you or they're just gonna be hanging around somewhere.
Right. We were doing a couple of years ago at Gen Con, we did the Greatest Thieves of Lankmar tournament. So we run 20 tables, and by the end of the 3 days, there's just like 2 tables that are vying, for in this tournament to be the Greatest Thieves of Lankmar. And one of our writers was like, guys, if you're gonna write a story set in Lankmar, there has to be Grey Mouse and there has to be Fafnir. And it's like, no, they can't appear here. As soon as Gray Mouser walks onto the stage, your game's over with. It's about Gray
Yep.
Mouser now. It's not about whatever nameless PC that you brought through here. So yeah, I'm in total agreement. We fall in love with these characters, but they're characters in a novel or a short story. They don't necessarily belong at the role playing table.
Yeah. And there's plenty of places in Lankmar. There was a whole time where Lankmar had a thieves guild before Fafhrd and Grey Mouser came in and killed everyone. So
Or they burned it to the ground. That's right.
spoilers for anyone who hasn't read Ilmet and Lankmar.
Well done, my friend. Nicely said.
But as we're kind of getting towards or close to the end of our time here, I do want to talk a lot about DCC 100. So the name of this adventure is The Music of the Spheres is Chaos. Harley just held up the map not too terribly long ago. This is a spinning wheel dungeon that you guys have in here. So just tell us a little bit of the the hook here. What's going to bring people to the table besides the fact that the dungeon spins?
Oh, it's pretty sweet that it spins. But no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So the premise behind DCC 100 is that these god eaters, these theophages, these cultists, they were trying to wrest their destinies free from the gods, have cast a line out through the cosmos, to a place beyond time, to a place beyond the material world where actual chaos reigns. But chaos doesn't exist in time, and it doesn't have material form, so it can't ever affect the world. So these theophages, in their bid to free themselves of gods, they created this soulless. They reached out to the elements of fire, of water, and earth, mixed them all in this vast alchemical alembic, where they carved out the heart of the mountain. They created these elemental channels where they channeled three elements. So they're funneling constant fire, earth, water into the base of this alchemical alembic, and the tiniest thread of chaos is being drawn through the cosmos to essentially to the core of this map here, right? And then had their plans, had the horror of their works not been undone, would have slowly spun this alembic and slowly distilled the thing at the heart of the chaos until it was this enormous titanic four-headed dragon with a head of fire and a head of earth and a head of water and a head of void of chaos, and it would have broken free of the of Sagarmatha, this enormous mountain, and then consumed the gods. Well, that's what our players have the option to do. The theophages, when they realized that their mystery, their plan was actually working, realized the horror of it fled. And so for the last several hundred years, the fires of creation have continued to boil and foment at the base of this alembic. So our player characters come in with the hopes of shutting off the elemental channel of fire, hopes of shutting off the meeting with the elemental lord of earth and convincing him to shut off the channel to the elemental to the channel of earth. Same with water. But as they're doing so, the only means of getting to those places on the map involve rotating some of the lesser spheres. So the solution to the puzzle, to the challenge, it requires spinning the alembic, but spinning the alembic also instills this monster at the heart of the alembic. So it's this mental race to solve the puzzle before you've created the monster that will destroy all reality. So it's DCC 100. I had the opportunity. I pitched it to Joseph many years ago, and so I've had the opportunity to really let it kind of simmer and sit, and it's grown much better for the 6 years that it took us to write it. And we just poured all the love we could into this. It's not the last adventure by far, but it's a capstone kind of the first 100 DCCs. And I don't know if I did a good job selling it, but I'm madly in love with this adventure, and I can't wait for it to get into people's hands. The Kickstarter has done phenomenally well, better than I had hoped. And so you see this flimsy material. It's a nice cardstock. It's laminated. It has Doug Kovacs art on it. Well, thanks to the Kickstarter, it's going to be like, an honest to goodness, like Monopoly board thickness. You're going to open that box set, put this thing together, and it's going to have real meat and weight to it. It's not just, so you have Doug's beautiful art, but also like a physical artifact that is meaty and cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And for something like this, for something that's got such kind of a detailed concept, you almost need that physical representation of it, just so people can keep track of it.
Oh, yeah.
And so the fact that you guys have emphasized that, I think is really cool.
I was terrified, dude, because like it's all cool for me, right? Because I get to think about it, and I'll make one mock-up and I'll pin it to my, I literally drew it by hand and cut out my little circle and pin it to this and get a little brad and spin it around, like, hey, look, Doug, it works. To be able to like actually produce that, to have the precision necessarily to make that so that somebody in Texas can open up the box set. Oh, and here's a spinning map with with 4 different circles that all manage to work together, and the map, the lines actually line up and it all makes coherent sense. That's a really cool thing. So it's neat that I got to write the adventure. It's amazing that Doug got to illustrate the map, illustrate the cover. But the third piece of that is Joseph Goodman and his team of really the printers at this point. He was like, Harley, don't worry about it. The printers are really good. I was like, this is bullshit. There's no way in hell. Doug, you have to give him like the pixel place where it's going to fit. He's like, no. These guys are really good. And sure enough, we got the printer proofs back and it worked. He spun the thing together. It's like, damn, these guys are really good, Joseph. I was dumbfounded. I would have bet money against them being able to get it right. And it came back and it actually worked. It was so cool. And then so to have it, so like whatever, the first 5 stretch goals were more handouts and more handouts and more handouts, and then so to have you think back to like Tomb of Horrors or something, where the players walk somewhere and you read it out loud and you're able to show them the what does that hallway look like. Backers have made what's going to be just an incredible adventure, and I wrote this stupid thing and I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to open that box and look at those illustrations, and run it for my kids at the library.
And as for your description of the adventure, I can't speak for anyone else out there, but I heard throughout your description of it just the opening, the intro to Holy Diver. So
that's awesome. We only steal from the best here at Goodman Games.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's fun because you've probably heard me say this before, but I love while I love mega dungeons, it's tough necessarily in this day and age, when we have kids, to can't commit to like, all right guys, we're gonna crawl every 10 feet through this massive dungeon beneath Waterdeep for the next 7 years. Like, that's not, just won't happen. People are gonna move, things will happen, their kids are going off to college, and so adventure itself is relatively manageable for all the complexity that goes into it. Mm-hmm. It is at the end of the day an adventure. You'll probably get 6, 7, 8 sessions out of it, but it is an adventure as opposed to like a mega dungeon with 14 different levels that we'll read but we'll never actually get to play. Like this is something that can be played. It's an adventure, which is exciting to me. That has value to me as a judge and a DM.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's always great when the concept is complex, the concept is mind-blowing, but the execution of it ends up being straightforward and simple and easy to follow. So well done in that regard.
I'm excited, dude. It's really cool to be able to pour all, when you're a nerd like me, to pour all your passion into something and then see it made manifest. There's the much like your giant in the distance that you're writing about. I have those shades of that are all my own personal influence, or are all through DC's 100. And it'll be really cool to get it into people's hands. And Doug did beautiful work with the art. I can't wait to see what the other artists come up with when it comes to the handouts and what have you. But it's just a real privilege to be part of a gaming company, of being part of Goodman Games, but also being part of the larger DCC community that's going to make this possible. You know, like without the backers, we never could have. We haven't yet to this point made like a hard Monopoly word adventure or backer thing. Probably our judges screens come closest to that. So it's really the DCC community that's providing Goodman Games the opportunity to make this adventure amazing.
Yeah, and you guys have done phenomenally well with this Kickstarter campaign. Yeah. Things were blown out of the water like within the first 24 hours, and you guys are up against like the Old School Essentials second box set, and there's a whole bunch of great stuff on Kickstarter right now that is vying for attention, but you guys have managed to have a fantastic campaign here with a lot of stretch goals just kind of blown away very early on. So the fact that this spoke so much to backers out there is a good sign, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think when Joseph, Mike Curtis, and I sat down and we mapped out like probably the first initial 5 stretch goals, the 75,000 hard board back, that was like all right guys, if this does really well, this is where we're gonna get. This is gonna be sweet, guys. and then you're right, and then we're looking at it 4 days later, like smokes, we got to come up with a plan. Because you've probably had been part of a backing Kickstarters, like they very easily, your promises can balloon out of control, right?
Oh,
and so
yes.
you want it, and it's like and people get high on their own like imagination, like, oh yeah, no, and I'm gonna make this, and I'm gonna make minis, and we're gonna deliver this, and you're like, at the end of the day, you're like, what do we know about minis? We don't know. You have no right to be selling people miniatures and promising you can deliver them. And so to have Joseph really tailor the stretch goals in a way that they're all deliverable. I'm not going to be writing another 50,000 words for this adventure. I don't have time for that. The adventure's written, the adventure's done, it's in layout. The art's coming in. There's we're not going to screw around with like delaying this. And so at this point, all the stretch goals are physically things that are going to make the adventure cooler. You're going to open up that box and like hopefully we'll get to whatever so I think the next one at 175 is like the MP3 from Loot the Body, with the potential of like a flexi disc that you can put on your turntable. But it's all stuff that is completely manageable, that is deliverable, as opposed to run this thing up to $500,000 and realize that 10 years out that we weren't able to deliver on those promises.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so one last thing that I wanted to discuss before we kind of wrap things up. I did hold this up beforehand, but I recently got a hold of the Lankmar Box Set, which is amazing for me because, like I said earlier, I'm a huge Fritz Lieber fan. I love Fafhrd and Grey Mouser. Anyone who takes one look at my Nighthaven setting that I'm working on right now is gonna go, oh yeah, he likes some Fafhrd and Grey Mouser. So what's been some of the like coolest things that you've been able to do with this Lankmar setting?
Dude,
what have been some cool things that you've seen from even like beyond yourself, like other contributors to Goodman Games?
Sure.
Just using this wonderful world of Lankmar.
So I have the privilege of working with Mike Curtis. He's the current line editor, production editor for the DCC line. Mm-hmm. And before he came on to Goodman Games full time, he was a historian. And I'm not sure the right word for it, but he would research stuff and like, okay, like, he would find notations in books, and this is page 15 of this edition of this, and my brain's not designed for that. Like I fall in love with stuff and like I run with it. Whereas Mike Curtis is a scientist, and when he and Doug and I were kind of fleshing out the bones, and I don't want to and glories that I don't have. Like Lankmar is Doug and Mike,
Yep.
100%. More of us contributed to it, but it's Doug and Mike. He created this Google spreadsheet of every term, where it was located in the world, what book it was located, what page of what book. And so I to this day, I have this beautiful spreadsheet, that this annotated, I don't know, glossography of Lankmar, that and the world that Mike Curtis put together. When you say what's the coolest thing we got to take part in, I think it was really probably the Greatest Thieves tournament at Gen Con back in 2019. Just be able to, like, you dream of Lankmar. It's and to be a licensee of Lankmar, and to of Liber, and to go in and try to deliver that world, and to have all these people playing in, you know his city of Lankmar was a real gift. Um, when you open up the map to in the box set, and you look at the city of Lankmar, and you compare it to, if you have a copy, or if you can find a picture of the image, you compare it to the TSR street map of Lankmar. There are certain key differences. Like, you'll see streets, different places named different things, and those aren't a mistake. They are 100% intentional. um, Doug and Mike, they deconstructed the TSR um, street map of Lankmar, which for the longest time has been the gold standard, which I grew up loving, which is amazing. But they went back to some of Liber's original works. They studied the text, mostly Michael, of like, whenever Fafford would reference a street, or Gray Mouser is darting across an alley, they would make a notation that actually created like key differences between the TSR maps and the maps that Doug created for the Lankmar box set. And it's all born out of the text. It's all, not that, me as a gamer would ever care or know, or like, it has no weight whatsoever, but it's all textually derived, for this gonzo game where you're going to be running across rooftops and falling down alleys, and hiding in boudoirs, hoping that the guards are going to run by. But the Lankmar box set has that core scholarly textual basis, which is just really cool and really fun.
Oh yeah, and that was one of the things that really, when I opened it up, my wife gave it to me as a Valentine's Day present. So when I opened
That's
it
true
up,
love, dude. You got to
it
keep her.
is absolutely. And so I opened it up and I was looking through it, and I was just like, this is all, like you said, it's like historical documents almost. Just like, this is a chronicle of the world of Nawan, of
Uh-huh.
Lankmar. Uh, any question that you might have about, well, what's the answer to, like, where can I find X, or where should my players go if they're looking for this particular thing or person? It's all in there. And so much more than that. And the fact that uh you know Michael went through all of those stories and all of that text. And for anyone who doesn't know, there's a lot of Lankmar stories out there. uh Fritz Leiber was very prolific with Lankmar, and they stretch for like 30 years of Lankmar stories. That's a lot to go through. The fact that it was that much love and attention put into it, uh, that just makes me love this thing all the more.
There was one of the first maps that Liber not published, but like he had submitted it to a fanzine, and it included a map of Lankmar. Like I purchased not a microfiche copy, but like essentially, like they went to it and they printed it out, from their scanned files, and sent it back to us, and and we were all able to share it around. Like the level of detail and passion that Michael poured into the setting, and Doug too.
Mhm.
We would have some of the original artists. There's just one Doug Kovacs, but we'd get art back for the Lankmar set, and it would have elves or dwarves in it. And like, Doug Kovacs was going to march into like Joseph's office and just like burn the place to the ground. Like, he Doug has no aspirations to be an art director, but he was like, no, this is bullshit. There aren't elves in Lankmar. There aren't dwarves.
Mhm.
And to the point where he for 3 months for a very. I'm sure he was miserable the whole time. He was art director for the Lankmar Box Set, like sending things back to people. Like, no, you can't do this. And the setting is so much better and so much more authentic for this task that he hated, but he's so earnest in his devotion to his own artwork and what his artwork's going to represent, that he couldn't, you know, he couldn't let it happen. He would have
Right.
sooner quit the project than have an elf and a dwarf standing side by side in Lankmar.
Yeah.
And it caused a lot of problems. Like, Joseph was like, "It's not this important, guys," and Doug's like, "This is so. I will kill people for this." Like, it was a real thing.
Man, and you're right. Like, there aren't elves or dwarves in Lankmar.
No.
It comes from a time period of sword and sorcery fantasy where everything was very humanocentric. It was pre-Tolkien or contemporaneous with Tolkien in some regard, but they had no interest in exploring kind of the demi-human races. It was just, here's what the humans are up to in these kind of weird worlds. It's the same thing when you read the Conan stories. There aren't really elves or dwarves or anything other than humans.
Yeah. And you can imagine what a disservice it would do to a Conan tale if a random writer got the license and introduced elves, like, "Oh, this is going to be brilliant. I'm going to bring Tolkien to Conan's world." I'm like, "Nah, dude, you just ruined it. Like your brilliant idea just stripped the setting of everything that gave it its magic." The Dungeons and Dragons has been with us for so long now, and that it's in a lot of ways it's become very self-referential.
Yeah.
And so it's the things we love about 5e were based on 4e and 3.5, which were based on second edition, which was second edition Lankmar. We first saw Drizzt for the first time, is it's born out of it's become its own mental entity at this point.
Yep.
Unto itself. And so the joy of going back to Lankmar, going back to Edgar Rice Burroughs, Robert E. Howard, to all these what's labeled Appendix N, all these pulp writers, was really this opportunity to do away with what's created, not because it's bad, but it's just like, let's strip it back to the bones, back to the things that inspired the people that made these games originally. Let's see what we can do with those mythologies and those stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a whole mindset and philosophy of fantasy that's really kind of been lost to time, and I love that people are keeping it afloat, because it's interesting. Having grown up in a world where fantasy meant elves, dwarves, halflings, because Lord of the Rings is the monolith that it is, I associated all that stuff with fantasy. And so to explore a time before Tolkien was that ubiquitous in kind of the vernacular fantasy, even before D&D made all that stuff kind of exist in our headspace as this is what fantasy is. Exploring these ideas of here's a humanocentric world, or here's a world where there really aren't that many demi-humans, where there's not a whole lot of magic, and what is out there is stuff that will quite literally destroy your mind and reap your soul. That's interesting.
Right. You don't use continual light to like light up your basement, because who knows, if I miscast that spell, I might walk away from here with like 3 eyeballs. Like,
yeah,
magic has consequence. Adventuring has consequence.
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, it's all really summed up. I know you mentioned that the Doug Kovacs front cover being really kind of the best summation of what this thing is, but I gotta say the text on the back cover here is also just like, you're no hero, you're an adventurer, a reaver, a cutpurse, a heathen slayer, a tight-lipped warlock guarding long-dead secrets. This soliloquy here on the back of the DCC book, that really, I think that really kind of sums up this philosophy of games and fantasy that so many people exist in when they run these games or when they read these sword and sorcery stories. I think that sums it up so much, just so concisely, and it's so beautiful in its own crazy way.
No, Joseph was inspired when he wrote that text, and it's something I'll refer back to. As corny as it sounds, like it's like 7 lines, like we should have it memorized by now. But you drop in, Reaver or Heathen Slayer or Tight-Lipped Warlock here when you're writing an adventure, and all of a sudden, it starts to stitch the story a little bit tighter, and the adventure starts to make a little bit more sense now, and it's that callback to, Appendix N and the pulps and now we're starting to explore what inspired the pulps. Like let's dig back into the the bones of this shared mythology that we enjoy just a little bit further. It's a really cool time to be the original Dungeon Crawl Classics adventures that we published for D&D were very much done in reverence and homage to the TSR adventures that we had loved as kids. And thankfully, we had worked that out of our system, as it were, right around the same time as DCC came along, the role-playing game. And so at that point, we were able to say, all right, okay, cool. Let's pretend none of that ever happened. What are the cool things about the pulps? And then reach into that. And so then you see, MCC born out of that, and Lankmar born out of that, Peril on the Purple Planet. And then and now, we're entering this next era where we're not referencing those, and we're not referencing this, and it's really wide open. So we're not trying there's not there's I love TSR, but there's not a single TSR map looks like this, and we're not aping TSR anymore, but we're trying to deliver the emotional resonance that we fell in love with when we walked into the caves of chaos and vanished down the pit, and 15 rats bit us, and we died of tuberculosis or whatever. That's dumb. That'd be cool though, a rat that gave you a lung disease. But just to deliver, and that's all right. I'll shut up. But to deliver on that the magic of discovery has, for better or worse, been rendered impossible when we all know what an orc is and what an elf does and what a dwarf looks like. And so to deliver new worlds and new opportunities of discovery that capture what it felt like when we were playing role-playing games for the first time. That's really what DCC is all about right now.
Oh yeah, you guys are setting out to make your 2112 or your Limelight to reference my favorite, or Moving Pictures to reference my favorite band.
Yeah, we're pretty fortunate. We're really fortunate, and to have the people in place where we have Doug Kovacs to illustrate it, and we have Joseph Goodman and Matt Hildebrand and all the people behind the scenes that make that magic possible. Like you and I get to be up front, and I'll and you're Ryan from Rolling Bones, and I'm Harley, and this is DCC 100, and dude, without James and without Jen Brinkman behind, and be like, whoa, Harley sure has a lot of typos in this whole thing sucks. And and Ryan has no audio because James isn't here. It's the infant. You do cool things because you're surrounded by cool people that make all of it possible.
Absolutely. Now, this conversation has absolutely flown by, and it's been fantastic, but we are running up against our time here. So what I'm going to do, obviously we've got the Kickstarter that we want to direct people towards, but anything else that you want people to take a look at, anywhere where they can, hear from you, see your work, all that stuff, any social media or anything like that you want to plug, go ahead and tell people where they can find Harley Stroh on the internet.
Thank you very much. You can find Harley Stroh on Twitter, but if I had one thing that I would want every viewer that hasn't played, go to Goodman Games, download the free PDF starter set, or the quick start for Goodman Games, or for the DCC RPG, play through it, and then write your own thing that is amazing and brilliant and magical. Goodman Games has just they do phenomenally support. They do a phenomenal amount of support for the third-party publishers, and every new judge, every new table brings a new iteration of DCC to the table, and I can't wait to see what everybody else comes up with. Like, I know my brain, whatever, that's boring, but like to see what Rolling Bones comes up with, to see whatever that 9-year-old that I'm running, for a table for at the library, what she comes up with. That's where the future of all this lies. So thank you guys so much for having me on. It's been such a huge privilege. Thank you for letting me ramble. But yeah, I can't wait to see what DCC does in the hands of next. Harley's old. Like let's get new writers in here to create new amazing things.
Absolutely. And one recommendation I'll make to anyone out there who has not done so already, just based on the kind of conversation we've had tonight, if you are interested in any of the stuff that we've been talking about and you want to go back to some of those sources, here are 2 places to start. Read Tower of the Elephant by Robert E. Howard. I consider that the origin story of the dungeon crawl. Tower of the Elephant by Robert E. Howard. And then also Ilmet and Lankmar. That's the story of how Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser met in Lankmar. There's a great collection called Swords and Deviltry, where you can get some of those origin stories of Fafhrd, origin of the Grey Mouser, and how they first met. But if you only want to listen to or read one story about Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser just to dip your feet in, Ilmet and Lankmar is a good place to begin things.
It's the best place. With those 2 adventures, with those 2 stories alone, like that's the foundation for everything. Take that, run some games, and then write something amazing and publish it and share it with all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Can't wait.
And if you are inclined to the comic book side of things, Roy Thomas and Barry Windsor Smith did an adaptation of Tower of the Elephant in their Conan run. So if you can find that, that's also pretty awesome and pretty trippy. So check that out too.
Well said. Well said.
So guys, that's going to do it for Rollin' Bones this week. I'll be announcing the full slate of guests that we have for March coming up at the end of this week. But just to let you guys know what's coming next Monday, we will have the Silver Boulets on here for the first time. That is Rocky Gardner and Ian McGarty. You guys have heard me talk about Ian on the show here. He has done a lot for me personally, helping me to understand getting an adventure out there, finding people to help you get stuff published, all that stuff. So it'll be great to finally have Ian and Rocky on the show to talk about their projects and what they have coming up. They're launching a Kickstarter campaign here soon. So that's what you can look forward to next week. And just as a reminder, everyone follow Valor Studios on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Howard_Ryan Gregg. ValorStudios.com and the Valor Studios Discord are great places to find information on what we've got going down. And, subscribe here on Twitch if you feel so inclined. And definitely subscribe on YouTube and share this with any friends of yours who missed this conversation but you think would really like to hear it. So until then, whether you rolled a 1 or a 20, I'm so glad that you rolled your bones with me, Ryan Howard, and I'll see you guys next time.